What's up, guys? This is Nikki from the Bike Minded Podcast, and this episode is brought to you guys by the folks over at Bicycle.com. They're the globe's largest marketplace for used bikes, where you can find over 20,000. You can search from over 20,000, you guys, used and refurbished road, mountain, gravel, you name it, bikes. You can search their marketplace for whatever brand you're looking for. They even deliver a box to your door so that they take all that work out of it for you. So feel free to check out their website. That's BUYCYCLE and use our code BikeMinded to receive 0% seller fees when you sell your bike on their marketplace online. Get your used bike sold so you can get a brand new one. Check it out, guys. Bicycle.com and use the promo code BikeMinded. Now let's get into this episode. Yeah, that's the way to go. Just because we have this studio is basically in my business where I operate out of. So I have a whole kind of office space dedicated to just doing this podcast, and I've got lighting and all these other goodies. So I'm trying to make myself look a lot more professional than, we really are. So it's like fake it till you make it kind of situation,
Yeah.
So, well, hey, thank you so much. Thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate you spending the time with me this morning.
Yeah. Thanks for being flexible on my timing. I just had a lot of stuff going on, I guess.
Hey, I've been following you on social since we met, and it seems like you're always going. So I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I guess we'll get right into it. We've got our guest today, Alison Tetrick. Thanks so much for joining the Bike Minded Podcast today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I really dig your shirt. I really dig that shirt.
Yeah, it's the Femme shirt here. This is a little prop to the Move podcast I do, covering all the Femme professional bike racing. So, and first bike race is tomorrow in the Olympics. We got the time trial, so really stoked on that.
Big stuff.
Yeah.
Big stuff. Yeah. My usual co-host, Erin, she isn't here today. She had a super swamped schedule and couldn't make today work. But her and I were just talking about the Femmes and like the coverage and the just changing landscape of women in cycling. And our takeaway was that like we're equally, if not more, interested in what's going on in the women's racing than the men's, And so I think it's really awesome to see you as this proponent and person that's, trying to push that forward. And I think it's totally deserving of it. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been incredible just watching it. I started racing professionally in like 2009, and to see, the ebbs and flows and just women's sports in general. But being a cyclist, it's awesome to see it grow and so much more opportunity and coverage. And it's kind of this, having a sponsor like Zwift, being the title sponsor of Paris-Roubaix and the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift is great to see, like, people investing in the sport, and then we're covering it, and like things like maternity leave and minimum salaries. Like, it's awesome.
Yeah, real basic stuff that we should have been taken care of a long time ago, but yeah, here we are. I guess it's happening. So yeah, kudos to you for that. I mean, my wife is a bit of a outspoken feminist, and I love seeing it in the sport that I'm super passionate about, and so I get to relay all this information to her, and she's just like loves hearing about the changes in the landscape. So well, very cool. Some of our guests may not really be familiar with your story. I was learning a few things about you in preparation for the interview. I mean, we'll briefly just talk really quick. You and I met at Wild West Gravel Grinder, which was just this really wild chance meeting. That was maybe my second ever gravel event that I've ever done, and so bumping into you was this hysterical thing. I like really had no idea who you were. I was just like, who is this woman? Like, I was just really intrigued because you're just a very very light and like entertaining person to be around when you're riding, and so I was just like gravitated towards you, and we rode together for a while. We ended up bumping into each other again after we separated for a while when you and I took a wrong turn. I don't know if you knew about it. I ended up like suffering a minor, close to a major concussion on that crash when you and I crossed paths. So yeah, it was a whole ass story, but
oh no.
Yeah, it was a day, but anyway, I was just intrigued from that point forward, and then found out who you were, and I was immediately like, oh, we've got to get her on the podcast for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. It was funny. I can get a little snarky. And so for those listening afterwards, I was happy you reached out, because I was like, was I a little too much? I was just having fun and slightly frustrated. I dropped my chain, but like I was having a blast. Yeah. and you can tell if I'm having fun riding my bike, if I'm quite gregarious and talking a lot. And if my training partners know when I get quiet, they're like, are you eating? Are you drinking? Are you tired?
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's a good thing to know though. Like, it's very obvious, you know, some people are just silent no matter what, and you don't really know if they're suffering or not. But yeah, it was one of those days. I had a few other friends, close acquaintances that were there that day, and the stories just from just making it through that event is pretty brutal, you know, just because everything's thrown at you. Like right when you think you've been through the hard part, it's like, you know, 12 river crossings and just gnarly rocks and boulders, and yeah, it's a day. But I was very, very excited to be able to reconnect after that day, because that's how much of that is in cycling, where you like meet people really briefly, and then that's kind of it. You know, you get this like little piece of talking to somebody, and you may really like them, but then like, you know, you all go off in your separate directions, and until the next bike event, maybe you'll bump into them again.
Yeah, I think that's really cool about cycling, though, because there's certain places in the country now where I consider home, or you have really good friends. I got married a couple years ago, and looking at, the people attending a very small wedding here in Petaluma, that most of them were from cycling. You know, they're mutual friends of my husband and I, and our officiant was Christy Moan, that like runs Unbound, right? Like there's just, you know, all these people that we've met through traveling the world, riding bikes. So it's really special. Like, and you can always go back to those events, or just go visit and go for a bike ride, or run into them at another completely different event. You could be in Iceland, and, you know, we could bump into each other. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, that's that through line, right? Like you all have that similar thing in common, and so it keeps you tethered together, whether it's running into them, or it's just like sharing an experience, or, you know, you share a lot of stories about what you're doing, and that radiates throughout all the people that follow you, whether it's on social media or just friends of friends. It's a very powerful thing. It's a community that I came from more of like a dirt bike background, and then gravitated towards this as soon as I found that there was such a strong community. It's night and day compared to where I came from. And so I was just like, oh, these are my people. Like, this is absolutely my people. And just to see so many people that, even though they're suffering, they're all have this smile on their face, and like moments after they're done with the day, even as hard as it was, like we're all celebrating and like sharing these war stories and stuff. It's special. So, well, I wanted to get a little bit into just, I'm sure you've shared a lot of this stuff. I mean, obviously you're part of a pretty large podcast. People have heard your story before, but I don't think our audience some of the audience may not be super familiar with your backstory. I did pull up a few points here in researching kind of your history. I had to share, because it sounds like you have a bit of, when you were younger, you rode horses and things like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my wife comes from, probably different from you. I'm not sure if you rode like Western or, like my wife rode dressage. So I got really familiar with like the whole horse world. It's very deep.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear more about that, and how that kind of turned into, you know, you went from that discipline and then kind of gravitated more towards the bike side.
Yeah, I born and raised in California. So born in Solvang, California, so Santa Barbara County. Grew up there, and then my parents moved up to Redding. So we had cattle ranches. They still have a fully operating cattle ranch up in Redding. So I definitely was riding Western, like rodeo style, and cutting and reining cow horse. Barrel racing was not much of, but more like practical Western, like ranch work on the horses. And so we lived pretty far from town. My parents still were 30 some minutes from town. You know, it's just quiet. So not a lot of organized sports growing up because my mom was not going to be driving me around. So, and I have a really athletic family. My dad played football at UCLA. Their high school sweethearts have been together forever. My mom's super athletic. She unfortunately went to college before Title IX, speaking of progression in women's sports.
Sure.
But I ended up playing high school and tennis in college, and I graduated college, degree in biochemistry, and I was still pretty competitive. Had some knee injuries. I still have a lot of knee injuries, but I still wanted to do something, so I got into running. And I just ran every day when I was working in the chemistry research and drug discovery in Boston. And my grandfather was a cyclist, and he didn't start riding bikes. For those listening, it's never too late. He started riding after he was 50 years old. He raced competitively well into his 80s, and he's a 17-time national champion, like a Masters national champion. And so he's just like elbowing me, saying, Al, you got to try this cycling. Like, you got to try this cycling. He's like, I just always remember he'd pick up my hand, like, I had big hands, so maybe that's why. But like something about me, he was like, you can go to the Olympics in cycling. And I'm looking at him, I'm like, that is the dorkiest thing in the world. Like bright neon clothes, like weird outfits. He would like come home from races and give me a musette bag. I'm like, this isn't a good purse. It's not good for groceries. Like, what is this thing
for? What am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah, thanks. And so he always told me I could go to the Olympics and be like the best in the world at cycling. And I didn't believe him. And then I got injured by running every day. And I started triathlon, and I bought a bike off of eBay. And I drove from Texas, where I went to college, and I drove from Texas to Colorado to surprise my grandfather that I bought a bicycle. So he was doing this local time trial out in Cherry Creek area in the Denver area. And I organized it with his friends, and I pulled up in my car and I said, hey, Paul, I would never call him Paul, but I was just trying to be real cool. Yeah. And he was just tickled to death. And then I started doing triathlon. I moved to the Bay Area, and I was working in exercise physiology, no longer in biotech, because as you can imagine, they don't like you to talk as much as I do in a lab. It was a little serious for me.
Yeah, they're like, are you lost? You don't seem like the rest of us.
I know. They're like, how are you a scientist? And I'm like, blah, blah, blah. I was working in exercise physiology, and, triathletes have their own set of dorkiness as well, right? So I'm trying to become this professional triathlete. I don't really know how to clip in or anything on the bike yet, but I just am going to achieve greatness. And so they tell me, oh, you got to do some bike races to get some leg speed, for the triathlon. I don't know. So sure. I went to a couple bike races here in the Bay Area, and I just started winning them. And that was in 2008, and I started racing in February, and by May, I was a Cat 1 or whatever, and I got invited to the Talent ID camp at the Olympic Training Center by USA Cycling, and I signed with Team TIPCO, which is...
Wow, that was quick. Yeah. That's a quick turnaround.
Yeah. So I was not... I don't know. Bikes are my family, but I never, thought about that, or I never really considered myself an athlete, probably until high school.
Yeah.
But, my parents, like growing up in the middle of nowhere, like working on a ranch and being kind of free and no barriers or anything. Like there was just a lot of like family activities. I think that just made us strong.
Yeah. No, it comes from it sounds like it came from the most like unexpected way though, but you have this like farming background and stuff. It does make you like a very fit, like all around person, gives you like a nice baseline to start with, right?
Yeah. And I was played tennis because my mom was at the tennis club, and waiting for my sister to get done with volleyball practice or something. So I got bored. And so I started playing tennis. And then the coach said I couldn't get a full ride to college. And he's like, you started way too late. And so I made it my vendetta to make sure I did get a full ride to NCAA college and play tennis. I was like, normally reverse psychology doesn't work for me. I will believe it if you tell me no. But then I think that was a turning point where I was like, oh, F you, I can do that.
Yeah. And what a twist, right? Though, because like two sports that kind of seem like they have this like elite status, right? Like tennis is very like prim and proper but then you come from this like farming, like blue collar background situation. And then, you're very, I think that's another part that I like about you is all these pieces like don't necessarily make sense together, but that's like, I don't know, that's kind of that's what I identify as well, as like this real mixed bag of like what's really going on here. And I don't know, there's something special about that mixture, and getting this like high level education and not fitting in that either. But it's cool that you've, you said like, whatever, it doesn't matter to me. Like, I'm just going to keep going. So
you don't have to really fit in anybody's box. You don't have to like define yourself by one thing. Like I say I'm a cowgirl and people think I'm just like wearing boots and belt buckles and cutoffs because it's cute, which it is. But I'm like, no, if you look at like my senior photos, like that's just who I am. And, for a while I tried to, fit in. We've all gone through those phases where, you try. And I think as we get older and fail enough at doing that, that you just
this is so not me. This is so not me. I can't pretend. It's not fun to pretend. Like it doesn't feel right. Yeah, just own your truth with that. And I think you get more confidence and people accept you much more, or at least you accept yourself better. Yeah, no, and it feels like you're finally kind of in your own skin, right? I think that's just one of those things. Like it's the same reason why, right? Like so many people when they grow up, they're like, oh, I need to move out of this small town and I hate it here. And then like somehow you end up back there, like, or you really find like comfort in going back to those places. And so, it's just a matter of like being okay with like, that's just who you are and that's all good, Yeah. So, and I did want to talk, so, you really skyrocketed through the like road scene and you really found like some success there, which is of course so awesome. But then you had what was like a string of injuries that caused you to step away from that. What were some of those injuries and how did that all come about? How did you navigate through all that period?
So I was actually really early in my career. So in 2010, I suffered a traumatic brain injury, hence I'll wince at your slight concussion. It's something I am really sensitive about. Also, my head is still very, very sensitive. And coming that comeback story is not that great because 2010 doesn't seem so long ago, but that was 14 years ago, and almost to the day, I think. It's probably about 14 years ago today, to be honest. Give or take 2 days. And life flighted out of a professional bike race. So it happened in a bike race. I had just come back from Italy racing the Giro d'Italia for the national team, for the USA national team, and flew straight to Bend, Oregon to do a professional bike race. A crash on a descent, and I shattered my pelvis and was, helicoptered out. But I was so obsessed with like the broken bones once I was coming around, and this was just before like concussions were popular to discuss. Like this is still in a time, it was a little before the NFL and NHL start looking at the CTE stuff and mental health. People were just starting to talk about that. And when you're recovering, it's much easier to see bones heal. Like you can go to the doctor checkups, you can see the little fuzzy bones, and in your brain you don't know. You don't know what's going on or what those effects are going to be. I returned pretty quickly, and I had a very, very fast year after that. It was probably one of my best road racing until several years later that I had. But I was so focused on like my identity as a cyclist, being able to pedal again, be able to walk again, then be able to pedal. I didn't really think about any concussion. I don't know, ramifications at that time. But then I had several, like multiple concussions. That is something that happens in cycling quite a bit. So I ended up crashing at the Pan American Games in just a fluky crash, and just slow motion, just kind of like endoed in a storm grate, warming up for the time trial. And then it was just like lights out. I couldn't function. So I think, that was it was under a year later or so. So it was not a good time to crash. And the next couple of years, I still raced once I was cleared by the medical professionals. But I learned that like I couldn't read, I couldn't focus. Wow. I went through a lot of like depression. It probably heightened my already anxious personality. And I came back, I think initially on just the wrong terms. Like when you're so injured and you're just like, don't understand what's going in your brain, people are looking at you and you feel crazy, or, you feel watched, or I don't know. And I was coming back because I didn't realize that we were just talking about this, that, we're so many different things. But this was like a pivotal point in my life where I realized I had just put myself in this box as a professional cyclist that was going to go to the Olympics. And I only considered that. And I forgot that I was, a daughter, a friend, a cowgirl, a biochemist. Like I forgot all of that. And I was so laser focused. I might've been a pretty bad person to be around during that time too, like very like self-centered and focused. And once I realized that like I was more than that, I could come back to the sport in a new way where results didn't matter as much, but then I got a lot of them, but it was more balanced and taking time to go to those baby showers, weddings, and funerals, and, making sure I was having fun doing it and not being defined by my results. And that was an interesting recovery.
A whole human, right?
Yeah. But we do that.
Yeah. Any head injury stuff is just so, it seems like now, like in current times, you're like, no doubt, head injuries. Like we know so much about it, but it literally changes like the entire human that you are, and you're just unable to process things. You're unable to like respond to things in the same way, and it really throws you off of your just your flow as like a human being for such a long time. So,
and it's hard for your caregivers or partners too. I mean, people ask me, how's your recovery? I actually had a very bad crash about a year ago involving a vehicle, and my head is sensitive, but it was not good for months this year or in last year, I guess. And people say like, how long is the recovery? Like, how long did it take? And I'm like, what day is it? What day is it? How do I feel today? It could be a couple steps forward, it could be a couple steps back. So I do recommend. Also, I worked with a neuropsychologist with all of my head injuries, but I ended up going to grad school to study neuropsychology for that reason, because it's very fascinating. It's just like a mix of science, but also some science that we can't define. And that was really helpful, because also you have an accountability partner that's not your like your parents or your partner, or so where you can, because sometimes you want to hide something because you don't want them to worry or whatever. So that was really helpful. But I'm very fortunate to have a wonderful family and a absolutely perfect husband. So
yeah, and it's great to have that kind of education behind you too, because I'm not to bring my own stuff into it, but I've suffered with anxiety for a very long time, and it would be nice to. It took me forever to like even really seek help in regards to that. I really tried to just like, I really self-diagnosed myself. Did a lot of like methods that were just like things I came up with by like really loose research online and things like that, and the traditional male way of not seeking real help and just trying to like grit your teeth and get through it yourself. But it's that partner, right, that always like picks up on those things, and they can recognize when you're, especially anxiety. It's one of those ones where it's just like, you as an anxious person, you don't even realize you're in it most of the time. And then it takes that other person in your life to be like, hey, you're disconnected and something's going on.
Totally.
So I have to totally credit my partner. She's the same way. Like she can pick up on my stuff like immediately. She's like, you're not like, this is not the person, She just is very aware of when I'm in those anxious moments. But I think that's such a cool thing to have, at least like an education and a specialty behind you that like you're able to pick up on those things a little bit better. Not that I'm sure as an anxious person, you don't always do perfectly still.
No. Like even the other day, like we're just coming up on a really big week. I'm gone next week, doing a video shoot with Bicycling Magazine. And then we go like straight to Aspen to cover the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift with the move. And so I'm just like thinking in my head is just whirling on like, how am I going to get bikes from this place to this point? Which by the way, he does all that, but like, how am I like, what are my outfits? Like how, like, oh no, I'm going to be so tired at this point and I'm going to be so tired here. I got to turn it on there. And I was like, Blaze, like, I'm just like, I'm a little nauseous. My heart is racing. I'm like getting hot and cold. I'm like Googling it. I think I have the flu. And I said, but I could either have the flu or it's generalized anxiety disorder. And he's like, you think? I was like, oh.
Do you think that's what you have?
That literally happened last night. I was like, I just Googled all of it. Like, I got it. And I was like, I could have like COVID or something. He's like looking at me. He's like, you're not sick. And I was like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah, that anxious brain it's if we could only like harness that energy into like the bike training or something, it's like we'd be like Grand Tour cyclists forever because it's just busy. It's a lot going on, but that's like I said, it's amazing to have a person that's, I don't know about your significant other, your husband, but like my wife is stable as all hell. Like she has granted, everybody has issues, right? Everybody has issues. But as far as like that side goes, my wife is pretty rock solid and she can see from afar, like very easily pinpoint when I'm having stuff. She's not involved in her own noise that's in her brain most of the time.
Yeah, my husband's name is Blaze. He's so wonderful. And I call him my calm and my chaos because I'm just like this tornado running around the house, leaving everything around and in life. And he's just so methodical and calm, very loving, but so organized, prepared. And I'm like a little like laser focused pinball, like ding, 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 ding. Like, what are we going to do next? And, it's so nice to have that, like kind of counterbalance. I think I feel bad sometimes. Like, oh, maybe I'm too much. Like I'm so in my head. And he goes, well, no, you bring like energy and, things that I never thought about. Like I asked him the other day, like, how do you fall asleep? And he goes, I just close my eyes and fall asleep. I'm like, wait, you don't replay every single conversation since you were 8? And then like, what if your mom doesn't like you? And then what are you going to wear tomorrow? And what are you going to eat? And he's like, no.
Yeah.
He's like, not everyone does that.
Yeah, that is one thing. Like I don't know if I just tire myself out throughout the day, but like that's one lucky thing I have is like I'm such a great sleeper. Like when my head hits the pillow, like I'm down. Like I am very lucky that my mind doesn't get so active before sleeping because I could imagine that's a nightmare.
Yeah, it's super fun.
Then you, to get back on track with your story a little bit, you, this is two anxious people just bouncing all over the place is what you're seeing. But then, I had these injuries and then you kind of redefined yourself. And I guess this was probably the emergence of the first like signs of the gravel scene. So how did that entry into gravel take place? Like, was there a specific event or just like, I'm sure they weren't even calling it gravel racing at that point from what I've heard from a lot of people. It was just like off-road events. How did that take place?
Yeah, I raced World Tour through 2017. And so I lived in Europe for about 4 years, from like France to Italy and then into Spain, and raced for a couple teams over there. My first World Tour team was Astana. Anyway, so I was having a nice time racing at that level, living in Europe, and I really enjoyed it. And then I started, it brought me back to that injury, and coming back from that main injury, I started not wanting to be there. No, I wasn't like inspired racing Flanders, which could be shocking to so many people, but you're like, oh, in Flanders, and then the next day we go to here, and nothing against Belgium, but like sometimes, the weather's not great. Like I was also getting scared of the crashing, and so I could be a teammate up to, unless I'm in a break, I was a teammate up to 5K to go, and I'm just like out. I was getting more scared because I just didn't want to go back to that dark place I had been. And so I was so proud of myself for coming. I enjoyed it for several years, and then I just could feel myself checking out. And I thought, somebody like deserves this far more than me. And so I told my director I was done. And in 2016, I told him I was done. And then 2017, he convinced me to re-sign, gave me a little extra money, which was a nice bonus. But I said, I will re-sign. Also, they probably just needed an American on the team. And I was like, I'll re-sign, but I don't want to do these races. And I want to do this gravel race in Emporia, Kansas. It's 206 miles. And he's like, well, that's the stupidest thing. It's 2 weeks before nationals. It's who wants to ride their bike that long? And I said, I will only sign if I can do this race that like everyone is talking about. And I'm having FOMO and I want to try it. So he said, fine, except I still do the races I asked not to do. Like he made me do like the worst races. He's like, if you're doing this 206-mile race and ruining the rest of your summer because you're going to be too tired, he's like, you're racing Belgium in March. And I was like, ugh. Fine.
Right.
So
and at that point, so just so people, if they're not familiar, I mean, I know most people know. At that point, it was called Dirty Kansas, right? Mm-hmm. And then it became Unbound.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I had to get into Dirty Kansas at the time. Now Unbound. I signed up, and that was my first gravel race.
Wow.
I went from like the Amgen Tour of California. I went to then the Pan American Games again, and then flew to Kansas on a bike I'd ridden once. And I had never done a gravel race, and I won. And the course record stood till like 2 years ago.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But it was so fun because, and you were talking about finding your people, and the moment hit, like I had never ridden my bike over 120 miles. And by the way, you really don't have to do 200 miles, by the way. It's like training for a marathon. People just like, how many times do you do 200 miles? I was like, once a year. Oh, if that. It's a long time. It's a long time on a bike. But I just had never, it was a new level of like physical exertion, like to ride 11 hours on dirt, something I wasn't comfortable with. And like waking up the next morning and just being like, whoa, I'm super bike hungover. That's amazing. Like I hadn't felt so tired yet so accomplished in so many years on the bike. Mm-hmm. And it was so cool because I found my people. Hence the woman that runs the event married us. So I found my people in Emporia, Kansas in that moment and in the gravel community because they were so accepting, so fun. And when I was racing World Tour, I felt like you're on a pedestal and you have fans and supporters and sponsors, and that's awesome. But you also then just get in your bus and go to the next destination, and you focus on your training, and you have your massage and your chef, and you don't get to interact with the people. And at something at like a gravel event, like we all get to just be shuffled together and hang out, and you get to tell the story about your Wild West, and I get to tell my story, how I almost just like stayed at that bottom of the hill because I met a rancher. My husband was glad I returned, but like we all have these stories. So we do this, and then you have this great, I think, just connection and community. So I started racing gravel. From 2018 till now, I race for Specialized. I've won Gravel Worlds 3 times, like the Rift, and lots of winning in gravel. But more important, it's the community cultivation, friends, and the push for equity and equality in the sport. It seems much easier in the gravel space than it does in others.
Yeah, and it's something that kind of, not that there isn't gravel racing in Europe, but like it's so uniquely kind of an American thing that has blown up. And as I've gotten more and more involved in this and seen some of these events grow, it's like I started more in like doing crit racing and things like that. And that's like a uniquely American thing too. I mean, I know they have like kermesses and stuff in Europe, but that's, we don't own it, but it's like, it's uniquely this thing that we've taken on, whereas like in Europe, it's road racing is their thing. Like we don't do that similarly here in the States. Like we've tried and done a few things, but it's never going to be like it is there. And that's kind of theirs. And here we have like this remarkable gravel scene that has just exploded. And we have some of the, we have some of the best, and now there's starting to be some European riders that are showing up and doing things, but predominantly still the American riders are really kicking butt, and it's a thing that we've chiseled away as like part of our identity, and I think that's super special.
Yeah, we always laugh. They're like, what are your plans? We're like, well, we go to Emporia, Kansas, Lincoln, Nebraska. Then we might go to Shawnee, Oklahoma. It's like such a Midwest thing too.
It really is. It really is. We don't really have a whole lot. Like I'm in, here in NorCal, like we don't have a whole lot going on. I mean, we have like BWR and a few other, we have some really great gravel events here, but it's like not on that top level, at this point. But yeah, it is, I guess it's so much more successful outside of California because they can actually run events, right? Like in California, you could not do that. Like there's just no way. You would piss everybody off.
Yeah, it's tough. Have you done a Grasshopper Adventure Series yet?
I have heard of it. I was actually, we interviewed Pete Stetna a little while back, and him and I were talking about the Grasshoppers because he's such a big fan.
I'm a huge fan.
I've heard amazing things, and I'm going to definitely do Grasshoppers next year. There's a handful of events. I'm going to try to even possibly try to do Unbound next year. So we'll see how things go. So I'm trying to get my schedule in line. But yeah, as far as California events, that Grasshopper series seems like it's the jam.
Yeah, 100%. It's amazing. And they're like in my backyard, so that makes me very happy. So
yeah,
it's pretty great. But yeah, gravel's very interesting. And people ask if I train on gravel and I race on gravel or ride on gravel in events, but living here in Petaluma, California, so Sonoma County, I'm like 99% road because I think I have some of the best road riding in the entire world, by the way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I went out there not too long ago I stayed in Petaluma. I went to Bottle Rock in Napa for that big concert, and my wife and I stayed in Petaluma. First time ever like really visiting and staying there. And I did a couple road rides while I was out there, and it's such a, it's just so rural out there, and like I'm sure I did not ride the best routes, but like it's such a unique place. It does remind me a lot of areas around here, just outside of like Sacramento, where there's quite a bit of riding like that, where it's like rolly hills and a lot of rural farming and things like that. But Petaluma has a lot of character.
It's a beautiful town.
There.
Yeah, we're like in downtown in Petaluma, where our house is, and I have one stoplight, and I'm gone for the rest of the day, and that's it. Just like a bunch of rollers, really quiet roads, a lot of cows and critters. It's beautiful.
What's the historic in downtown? The historic hotel, we stayed there. I think they do like a lot of like weddings and things like that.
Oh yeah, it's just Hotel Petaluma.
Hotel Petaluma. Yeah. I should have known that one. But yeah, it was a really, really cute little spot to stay. I love that little downtown area. So yeah, you guys picked a good area.
Yeah, once I wasn't working in the city anymore, I was down in Mill Valley, and then I moved up to Petaluma for the riding and a little warmer, get out of the fog a bit. And the roads are just so cool. So it's awesome. Everyone should visit Petaluma, and a very cute historic downtown, and it's old. At least for California.
No, and like yeah, great wine there if you're a wine drinker and things like that. It's its own thing. That's what I like about it. There's some towns where you're like, I couldn't guess where I am at really based off of like there's just not enough character, but that's one of those places where you're like, this is so uniquely Petaluma.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, well, cool. And then you had you 3-time gravel world's champion. I had a note here about, I guess you had already mentioned it. So you had gotten a degree in clinical psychology. Was that like after the gravel? Like, where was that in this whole grand scheme, like timeline wise?
It was in 2014. I entered a PhD program for neuropsychology, and I did that program while racing. And then I needed to work in a clinic to get the PhD. Like I did the dissertation, did all this stuff, and then I didn't realize I actually didn't want to work in a clinic. Back to that lab situation. I was like, I don't know if I like people enough for that.
Yeah.
I like the research side. But yeah, so that was, I graduated in, I think it was from 2012 to 2015. That's when it happened. So Not during
Nice.
gravel.
Very
yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Busy schedule, sounds like. I mean, to finish your education and also be racing simultaneously, that sounds rough.
Yeah. And I also was working too, because bike racing, which is fine.
Yep.
It is what it is at the time. But yeah, but I think that actually helped. I'm not complaining about it. I'm happy, the paychecks are getting bigger and more sustainable, but it did help me knowing I had this amazing job with Amgen. So it's a biotechnology company, and I was working for them remotely. I think I'm ahead of this. I was working remotely before remote was cool. See, we did gravel before gravel was cool. Like, I'm feeling
Trendsetter.
I am. But I was working for Amgen. I'm like studying, and so if I would crash or get dropped in a race, I would just be like, well, somebody else is going to pay me anyway. Like, I'm going to be fine.
Yeah, that is a nice thing to have in your back pocket, because sometimes, like, yes, it makes you hungry when that's your only thing, right? But like, what happens when that doesn't work out? Because all those other women that are doing that are just as hungry, to win. And once you start getting a couple of those injuries, right, it's that thought that's in your head that causes the fraction of a second that's like winning or losing, and so that's where it starts getting tricky. Yeah.
We my husband and I have a LLC. It's called Saga Ventures, and during COVID, people were making sourdough bread, and that was our sourdough bread, was to start just get an LLC here, and we made bandanas of all things, but they're cute, cowgirl theme, and good for gravel, by the way.
Love it.
And but the proceeds go to NorCal High School Cycling League, and then when we're in Kansas, we give them to Coyote Composite, which is also a NICA chapter there, and we work with Outride from Specialized. And so I get to be involved with these programs that are about getting more kids on bikes, especially more girls on bikes. But when I go to these camps, like NICA has these camps called GRIT, which is girls riding together, and I can go camp. They come to Petaluma to camp, actually, and so that's cool, and ride mountain bikes and shred around there. And they're much better on a mountain bike than me. But I get to go to these camps, and they're asking a lot of questions on, some of it are just, they're questions that junior high and high school girls ask you. So it's whatever. It's very funny. And, but a lot of times, the ones that are more serious about like pursuing this as a career, being a pro or something. And like my big thing, no matter if you're trying to be a professional or not, but it's like investing in yourself. And I lost touch with that, but investing in yourself. And then like the first really important part of that to me is education. Like, don't give up on your education just to pursue something. Like, you can do both, so that if you keep investing in yourself, then you are so much more than just that. And I'm not sure it made me the fastest racer in the end, but I looked at some riders that just, go to altitude camps and live like a monk and don't drink wine, or, don't eat this. And that did not make me happy. So if I wasn't having fun, like, why do that? But then also it helped me knowing like, okay, I'm highly educated, I'm intelligent, I have this great job that I actually really like, that's not just the bike, and, gets back to my science part and advocacy. And so telling, juniors, and even doesn't matter if it's education and now, but just like investing in yourself to keep pursuing more and not just limiting to just your results or performance. And
yeah, and there was a part in there when I was listening to you that just so rings true. It's that paying attention to, like, at the end of the day, is that even worth it? Is that a life that you want? If you're not able to like enjoy foods that you want, and you're not, I don't know, and there are some where that totally makes sense, right? Like, you listen to the stories behind like a Kobe or like some of these like top athletes, and like, that's a razor sharp focus for them, and nothing else matters. And that comes at a very high price, right? And for a lot of us, I'd say most people realize that, yes, it's great to be the tip top person, but like, so much else in your life is going to suffer. And you need to decide really quickly if that's like worth it for you, and that's an important thing to chime in on. It's like, for me, at the end of the day, like, I love eating the foods that I want to eat. And like, even someone that's as lowly as just like you start getting really serious. Cycling is really slippery slope, right? No matter what level you're at, you're a cat 4 or 5 guy. You're like really, I've seen guys that are like psychotic, and they're doing like 300 plus miles a week, and like their whole life is falling away while they're just trying to be this like low level racer. And I'm just like, man, the scale is like really off, and it's not sustainable, for one. And two, it's like, don't you want like a long career? Don't you want to like feel good about these events that you go to, and you want to like have your family or friends there? And there's a balance to it, just like everything else. And I think it's easy to fall out of balance, especially in this sport.
It's so hard because it requires a lot of time, and it's, you have to train a lot to be successful. And I have seen that in so many training partners where sometimes I'm like, I'm very happy to have that company for my 5-hour training ride and have like a good wheel. But I'm also like, dude, should you like go to the soccer game instead of be doing this? Like, I'm happy to be doing
I see
this.
That.
But
yeah, I see that. Like, I'm a dad of a 2 and a 4-year-old, and like I have to get very, very creative with my training because I've seen other people and they go and do like these weekday rides, and I know they're missing out on XYZ thing, and it's like, I can't judge. Like, that's your life, but like at the end of the day, you kind of have to deal with those repercussions of making that the priority. And as much as I love kicking ass in an event and like finishing really well, and I've had that feeling before, I only really enjoyed it so much because I knew I did it in this balanced way. And I'm not perfect either. I'm not claiming to I'm not patting myself on the back here, but it's just like, I think I was able to get my priorities straight early on with my cycling, and just know that like, we're going to do everything we can within this balanced way. I'm never going to let it get too far out of hand, because I don't want to build up those resentments from family and work and all these other things that are important as well. So yeah, it's got to make it feel good at the end of the day, and you got to feel, everybody around you's got to feel good about it too.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, happy athletes go faster, or, whatever, all these sayings. But my coach also said, like, fun is fit, fit is fun. And like, it's true too. Cause he's like, I mean, for several years, I don't get a training plan. I've had one for a long time. Don't get hit by a truck either. That really screws up training. But,
yeah.
But like, that was such a cool point, because I was at a point in gravel then, so I did gravel to escape this like structured world tour racing. And I know everyone's like, that's poor you. You had to race and do the Giro and do Flanders and all this stuff. Like, but yeah, it was like, you're in this rut, and it was so nice to be able to choose like your own exit, or choose what you want to do next, and like not be forced out of something. And that's like a cool opportunity. And in gravel, pursuing all these results. And then one day I'm just like, it's getting like, I want to race when I want to. And other times, like, I want to ride with my husband and have a nice time and make new friends, or do neutral support. Like Ian Boswell and I did Creos at SVT gravel, and we put panniers on it and like flat fixing stuff and snacks. And I mean, it was so fun to ride 100 miles on this e-bike, just bringing stoke for people, helping them like fix their flats. And I was like, this is like awesome. So, I mean, there's so many ways you can approach it, but I do think, though, he said, I was like, I don't really want to train. I don't want to do intervals. I don't make me do VO2s. I don't want to sprint, and he's like, well, don't you have more fun on your bike if you're fast? And I was like, oh, that's a good point. So and I think, there is that line. And I think we can all, I think most people within reason, especially with like indoor trainers and how many other things we have access to now that are like really, really accessible for a lot of people, it makes it like, hey, if you've got all this stuff going on, you can still make something happen within an hour, and you can still have structured training, and you can still have all these things that were so much more difficult to attain even like 10 years ago or something like that. But I agree with you. It is a lot more fun when you've done the work and you show up on the day. And I have a perfect example of the opposite of this. I just did Death Ride for the first time. I want to do that. I've never done it.
Oh, it's great. It's one of the most stunning like mountain range. Like, it's remarkable. Some of the best descending and best climbing I've ever experienced. But I'm also like not a climber and have not done really any rides with significant climbing in months and months and months. Again, the people on the podcast know this. I've been renovating this RV for my family so that we can go and like camp and do all this stuff. So like, I've been just baseline trying to maintain some sort of fitness, but no like climbing days, no big elevation. And that day is just over 100 miles with 14,000 feet of climbing. It's a whole day of climbing, you know, with a few fun descents, you know, in between. But yeah, I finished and it was fine, but like I didn't have that level of fitness to be able to complete that and enjoy it, which like, you know, it would have been a lot more fun if I had the legs to like get through that in a much shorter amount of time and not be sitting at 70 miles with 3K of climbing to go and just like questioning my existence, you know, and like really wondering if I can do it, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it is important to like at least show up and feel fit enough to have a good time.
Yeah.
Sure.
But also, I think it's important to show up, and like that's showing up for your friends and loved ones, and also for yourself. And if we're talking bikes or sports, like I have this thing where I realize, you know, as you know, I mature in my sport, and how I want to define what kind of athlete I want to be and help my community and like give back to my community that's provided me this incredible opportunity to race my bike around the world and do product innovation, you know, covers of magazines and like building saddles. That's a in-depth one. That was the last bicycling magazine. It's an interesting one on our amazing saddles that we have created at Specialized. But I did realize what do I want to do with this sport? And I think like just going back to like how I started gravel racing and then like our bandanas that go and get more girls and kids on bikes is like this I've like sacrificed, and I hate using the word sacrifice because like you're not sacrificing to go ride your bike. Like it's a privilege to be able to be healthy and fit enough and have free time enough and afford that bike and afford the time. So it's like not a sacrifice. Yeah. I also hate the word suffering too, but that's another story. I'm like, no, that's also a privilege. Sure. You're going hard. That is what you are doing. You are trying. You are trying. Mm-hmm. But like, yeah, anyway, just giving back to this community that's bolstered like so much of who I am and what I care about and have loved me through crashes and failures and heartbreaks and, you know, bad relationships and, you know, all this stuff and
all the things. Yeah.
And then through this whole sport, I found the love of my life because I hired him to help me at Unbound. And, you know, insert 5 years later, here we are, 2 years in our marriage, but
he's still working to this day.
He is. He does all my support. That's accurate. Like I said, he's an angel. But to not so I realized with me to make sure I was staying healthy, balanced, like training, competing at the races I want to, building community, giving back to my community, that I just didn't want to be defined by finish lines. And that's like with your like death ride, you're showing up to something that you might not be ultimately prepared for. You're used to feeling really good at some events and maybe horrible at others. We all been there. But it's like just showing up is like, I think people that start something, like you have to start somewhere. So like start lines to me, I think require more bravery than any finish line in a way. Like it's a scary, daunting thing. Like what if it's your first 20-mile ride or your first century or your first gravel race? It's daunting. And so just showing up to that start line requires so much bravery. And so for me, I was like, I'd rather show up for people, show up for myself more so than winning at like all costs. Like I'm very proud of some of my accomplishments. You know, I'm proud of all of them, but I've been working on why am I not more proud? Because I think I'm like, was I actually having fun doing that? You know, so like if you think about it, and so some of the most proud are that first winning of Dirty Kansas, now Unbound, podium at UCI World Championships in a team time trial, like stuff like that, where I like really enjoyed the process and in the moment really enjoyed it as well. But anyway, I went on a tangent. But you already know I do that. I love it. It makes sense to my brain. I'm like, yes, more tangents.
But I think that is true, right? Like we do put these winners and these finishers on such a high pedestal, right? But it's even like in the tour, and people are seeing this through like the Netflix doc. It's like those guys in the tour that are the top guy, they didn't ride their own race the entire time and show up and sprint for the win. Like that is a whole team and a whole network of people that are doing that. And I think that is important that you are making these other things. Of course, you'll always have those finishes and those key events and all that good stuff. But then on this other side, you're building up the community and raising up these like women to feel empowered to like pursue these careers, which now we're like building a foundation that they can actually build a career that's like lucrative, and hopefully we'll get to this point to where there's like space for all these women to like really make that like their life's goal is to pursue these careers. And that's really empowering. So I think at the end of the day, you'll walk away with this whole like, just like it's a weird analogy to make, but like an investment portfolio, right? You got all these things and they all are going to like kind of work together in this balance to like make you this whole person. And I think that's really awesome what you're doing with the youth. That whole NICA. And I mean, I would have just killed to have that as a kid. Like I got involved in basketball and all these other things that, not that I don't love those things, but I grew up on BMX bikes and just shredding around and riding. What I look at now, when I'm on a gravel bike, all I think of is like, oh, this is just what I did on a BMX bike as a kid. I rode around a lake and I had a helmet on and I would put music on and I would just jam like full speed, like VO2 max, as I understand now, just like efforts, just until like my heart almost exploded, right? And it's funny now that I end up doing a lot more gravel and I do cyclocross and some XC mountain stuff. But it's all because of what was formed when I was a little kid. That was like the most fun thing to do. And I would have just killed to have like one of these race series for like younger kids to go do, and learn. So that's super special thing.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool.
And I like both of them. Like NICA, I mean, the opportunity, like, you don't have to like race. They have different categories. There's like categories that the people are very focused about racing, but it's really about, like what gravel did to me, it's meeting like-minded people. They're all really supportive of each other. And so there's some athletes that, student athletes that are out there having fun, making friends, just like you would in any other sport. And so it's super inclusive. It's really diverse. And then Outride's an interesting one. And this will like strike home to you on this, but this is more in the junior high and younger category. And, Outride provides bikes. They are specialized to, grant and through grants to schools and programs, but it's for kids suffering with, or not suffering, sorry. Kids, students that have, ADHD and, are, maybe getting suspended more, having a hard time focusing in class. So it's like riding for focus. So these kids are able to like have a 45 minute to an hour little break in school and go to shred, like you're talking, around on bikes. And then they're coming back to school, like into the classroom with more focus. They got some of those like crazies out,
That's
all
so
that
cool.
energy, that we're very familiar with. And so then the suspensions are going down, the grades are going up, and it's just really awesome. I've gone to a few of these schools up here in NorCal, and it's just incredible. Like watching the confidence of these students grow just by exercising or getting out during a school day. So that's a totally different one. That's nothing to do with racing, just the power of movement. And I mean, it's so powerful because so many families now, right? Like they're so stressed. And as me raising these two kids, I realized that like, of course I get my kids out on bikes as much as possible, but like you may just not have that time. And those kids that are suffering with like ADD and, anxiety or whatever issues they're struggling with, if they don't get that physical activity out, which it doesn't seem as exciting to like, hey, I'm going to go run around even if they have recess or whatever the heck they have in the morning, and they're not getting that energy out. And then you sit them down in a class all day. It's like they're losing it. Mm-hmm. And of course they're struggling through class. It's like they weren't able to get any of that out during the day. And I know if I don't come here in the morning and either get like a workout on the trainer or like ride outside or go to the gym or something, I am a much more useless person throughout the day than I am when I get something in. So I'd never heard of that program, but that's remarkable too. And that's something that was piloted by Specialized? Yeah, it's started as called the Specialized Foundation. Mike Sinyard, the founder of Specialized, has ADD. And it was something he's really passionate about. And so it started with that. It got rebranded as Outride. So, there's a ton of scientific I'm a science dork, I know, but there's a ton of, they do a ton of research on the science and analytics and all these programs. And for anyone listening that maybe volunteers at a school or is a teacher, there's a grant option that happens once a year, and you basically apply for it and it can just come to your school. It just requires somebody having that, one of the faculty or something having time to facilitate that. But, I just think it's awesome to get kids moving, especially today. You know, you're hearing about the iPad kids and stuff like that. Like, I think it's an awesome experience. Yep. But yeah, it started, and now there's been like over $50 million given to schools, and then watching how your brain chemistry changes. So they've tracked that, worked with, big research facilities to track how your brain changes. And then there's all the research on just the success of the students' education and performance and that side of things. So I did tell you I was obsessed with education. So I have I have a lot of education and I like getting good grades. Did I win? No.
That's right. Yeah. Teacher's pet over here.
I was valedictorian. Come on.
Oh, there we go. Dang. Flex that muscle. Flex it. This has been a great conversation and interview, Allison. It's been really nice to chat and like learn about your story, but honestly, the bigger picture thing here for me is like I just feel so inspired by hearing all the things you're involved with, your whole backstory, and how you've kind of chiseled out this like unique spot for yourself in the sport and in the industry. And I really look forward to bumping into you again at some point. We'll hopefully have to link up on some events. I'll let you know when the bigger gravel thing comes, and we'll have to link up.
Yeah,
for sure.
And if you guys want to come to Petaluma, you can come visit us. We're very proud. We own a guest room. We're proud we own a house and a beautiful garden. And but I will take you on some amazing rides if you would like to come and visit. It'll be a little cooler, maybe. It's good to escape the heat.
Yeah, especially for us. It's like 105, 106, 107 every day here where we're at. So it's pretty brutal.
My parents had 118 in Millville. That's where they are. Not technically Reading, but boy.
Yeah, I don't know. Anything over 100, you're just like, well, this sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for the kind words and the time. I really appreciate it. I figured we would hit it off, and we got a little on the mental side of things, but it's Bike-Minded Podcast, so I figured why not?
Exactly. They're used to the tangents here. Even my co-host Aaron, we're all simpatico. It's like basically we're similar people, so we're bouncing all over the place all the time. So, I appreciate you spending the time with me today. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
If you guys haven't, definitely check her out on Instagram. What's your Instagram handle?
AM Tetrick, AMTETRICK.
Okay, perfect. And the podcast you are on?
It's called The Move
podcast.
Yep. And I cover mainly the Move Femme, but sometimes on others. So we cover all women's cycling, like the larger events. We'll do Olympics, and then be live and crazy during the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift via Aspen.
Perfect. Awesome. So cool. Well, you have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll check you later.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.